everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
Simultaneous Transmigration. The Fate Traveler begins from Lord of the Mysteries, Chapter 60 to 64, Ritual Magic. Upon hearing Moraine's words, the stingbug flapped its wings again. The next moment, a vast amount of information spread rapidly across the entire planet via pheromones. This is the unique trait of the swarm. The swarm of the propagation possesses a very special type of pheromone, and the speed at which this pheromone spreads is completely incomprehensible. Before the birth of super-long-range remote communication, pheromone communication between the swarm was considered the most efficient means of communication in the universe. During the swarm disaster, a group of bounty hunters who hunted swarm servants once captured a solitary residual sting bug and modified it into a communication tool for the front lines. Under varying degrees of stimulation, the distance-defying pheromone sensing would change the sting bug's color in real time, enabling the transmission of simple information. Relying on this code system, the bounty hunters fought with increasing bravery on the battlefield, until they ran head-on into a residual swarm king attracted by the pheromones. And obviously, the swarm king they faced was not a half-baked amateur like Moraine, but a true emanator of the propagation capable of devouring an entire galaxy. One can only say that the great stage of the path is always open to the brave. But the brave also pay the price for their bravery. While waiting, Moraine raised his hand to touch his hair and pulled out a butterfly. This was a butterfly that had inherited Moraine's curse technique. It didn't have any particularly powerful combat capabilities, but it could talk to people. With a gentle push, the butterfly took flight from his fingertips, heading in the direction of the rare gem. Come to think of it, can you shrink a little? Moraine looked up at the now enormous bug. The sting bug moved, indicating that it could do so. Subsequently, the sting bug's body began to shrink rapidly, returning to its original fist size, and landed on Moraine's hand. Haha, you're much cuter this way. Moraine patted the sting bug's wings. He could feel that after consuming Moraine's blood, and with no resistance from either side, this sting bug had formed a connection with him. In a sense, this bug had changed its surname, and it could already be considered his bug offspring. Does this count as an adopted son? It could access Moraine's swarm network, but it would also be influenced by Moraine. Moving his mask to cover his face, Moraine hummed something under his breath and pointed in several directions. Pale blue glintstone covered the surface of his skin, and using himself as a wand, he began to employ glintstone sorcery. Glintstones were fired out one by one, flying into different directions of the jungle. A few minutes later, a buzzing sound echoed from deeper within the jungle. Moraine looked up and saw what appeared to be a dark cloud approaching rapidly, bringing with it an increasingly loud buzzing sound. That was the swarm. It was the swarm of this planet's swarm servants. Truly magnificent. I'm curious when my own swarm will reach this level. Moraine watched with great interest, yet felt no fear. Soon, the swarm landed not far in front of Moraine, a dense, massive expanse. These were likely not all of them on this planet, but with a sweep of his gaze, Moraine spotted a bug that was clearly different from the others. It was larger, with more intricate patterns on its body. This was a hive mother. The hive mother came to the front of Moraine, lowering its head, its 3 pairs of compound eyes looking down at him. It was thinking, pondering whether the creature in front of it, which clearly did not look like a bug, was actually a hive mother. Moraine looked up and met its gaze without a shred of fear. But soon, Moraine shook his head. Sigh as expected. He sighed. Those found from elsewhere just aren't as endearing as one's own bug offspring. He held the sting bug and shrugged. I kept thinking that I had finally started to accept bug offspring, but in the end, I can only accept my own bug offspring. He patted the head of the sting bug in his arms. You ate my flesh and blood, so you barely count. As for the others, forget it. At this moment, Moraine suddenly raised 3 fingers, and his voice appeared in the minds of every bug present, causing a slight commotion. Do you know? The essence of ritual magic is to pray to higher beings for power. Therefore, I have been researching, trying to use the path itself as the object of prayer. Of course, I've also studied the eons a little. I can only say that most of the time, it's useless. Specifically, it depends on whether the content of the prayer aligns with the philosophy of the path. For example, if you want to create a ritual magic for rapid healing, using the abundance as the target of the ritual magic will basically never be refused. But it's actually hard to distinguish whether the target of my prayer is the aeon or the path itself. Moraine spread his hands. However, that's not actually that important. Anyway, as long as it succeeds, there's no need to care too much about who the specific target is. In short, in this universe, there are probably 3 eons from whom it is easiest to pray for power. First is the aeon of the nihility, 9, who never actively refuses. Second is the aeon of the abundance, apothecary, who answers every plea. Third is the aeon of preservation, Clippeth, whose driving force is said to be devotion. This might also be related to their paths themselves. Among them, I dare not use the power of the nihility, and the power of the abundance is useless for now. Therefore, I borrowed the power of preservation. Currently, it seems the Amber Lord hasn't paid me any mind, but that's fine. What I am doing now is using power to protect this planet. Although I don't actually care much about them, at least part of my goal is indeed for protection. By the way, as a sequence 8 of the mystery prior pathway, I can set up ritual magic very quickly, omitting a lot of content and completing the ritual setup with ease. The material for this ritual is the wish power of the people currently on this planet who want to survive. This is my first time trying to set up a ritual using wish power, and the effect is unexpectedly good. Curse technique revealed. As his voice fell, amber-colored walls appeared around the swarm, and the sky and ground were also stained with the color. These rays of light surrounded all the bugs of the swarm present, leaving them nowhere to hide and unable to leave. In the world of Lord of the Mysteries, even the weakest person, even if they are only a sequence 9, can connect to an outer deity using ritual magic. If one disregards the consequences, ritual magic itself is quite remarkable. Actually, I was worried at first that the Amber Lord wouldn't be willing to lend me power. After all, it's obvious that I'm just a small fry. I don't know if this is an automatic response from the path, or if the Amber Lord really expressed approval for this matter. Perhaps it was Argenti that he approved of. As he spoke, Moraine held the sting bug that had first conversed with him, took 2 steps back, and walked out of the ritual's range. The swarm trapped in the ritual began to panic. Their biological instincts made them realize that something was wrong. Stop right there. Moraine's voice once again echoed in their minds through the simultaneous cursed method, conflicting with their own thoughts and causing their intended actions to freeze. The hive mother recovered the fastest. After pausing for only a few seconds, it quickly spread its wings, rushed toward Moraine, and slammed into the amber light barrier in front of him with a bang. Chapter 61, Your Mother Doesn't Want You Anymore, and it was precisely this hesitation of a few seconds that made it completely too late. The ritual formed, and amber-colored light enveloped the surrounding the swarm, while directly above them, a translucent hammer vaguely appeared. This, of course, was not the hammer in the Amber Lord's own hands, and Moraine did not have such great capability. This was merely a phantom image, likely an automatic response from the path itself to the ritual. A mother the size of half a small hill slammed into the amber-colored barrier, creating ripples across it, but it did not break through directly. The power of preservation, if nothing else, is certainly tough enough. Just at this moment, a massive rose-colored spear descended from the sky, piercing straight through the mother's spine from top to bottom. This amber-colored barrier did not block the spear. Good work, friend. Argenti's voice rang out from behind Moraine, passing by in a flash. I didn't expect you to actually be able to find the mother. Argenti brushed past Moraine and entered inside the amber-colored barrier. He had been called over by Moraine using a butterfly. It's actually not difficult, Moraine replied, not caring whether Argenti could hear or not. If one can communicate with the bugs, it's actually not very hard. After all, they look quite stupid. Several more explosions rang out from not far away. Missiles flew in from the distance, entered the barrier, and struck into the swarm. This planet is not the kind of backward civilization that has absolutely no ability to fight back. It had long since been integrated into the territory of the Interstellar Peace Corporation. The employee Tate, whom Moraine had just met not long ago, had originally come to this planet to conduct a trade. And if this place were backward enough, then the corporation would likely not be facing this planet with such an agreeable attitude as trading. More and more dense attacks descended. They had only been caught off guard at the very beginning by the mother, which was skilled at camouflage, and were only counterattacked by the swarm afterwards. Now that the mother was trapped, they were not incapable of launching a counterattack. After all, it was at least a planet that could trade with the corporation. It wouldn't be as completely helpless as indigenous people who were totally disconnected from the interstellar world. And right now, as Moraine tricked the mother out and Argenti began attacking it, the survivors also began their counterattack. What they needed to do now was to eliminate the mother at all costs. After that, they only needed to keep a close watch to ensure no new mother appeared. The remaining bugs would slowly lose entropy and die on their own. This period would not even exceed 2 months. Moraine did not enter the battlefield. He stood outside the circle, interfering with the mother's command over the swarm, constantly sending chaotic instructions to prevent Argenti from falling into a disadvantageous position due to being ganged up on. More and more missiles fell, and the dense explosions forced even Argenti to temporarily withdraw from the battlefield, retreating outside the barrier. Because the lethality was high enough, the explosions were also locked within the barrier. Watching the situation inside the amber-colored barrier, Moraine held the sting bug in one hand and tapped the mask on his face with the other. Suddenly, the corners of his mouth curled up. His voice rang out once again in the hearts of all the deluding swarm servants. Speaking of which, now that the swarm emperor is dead, aren't you going to die along with it? Oh, I remembered, you don't even have a swarm king. Why don't you stay with the swarm king? Do you not like it? Although saying it like this sounds a bit like an insult, it's actually the truth, isn't it? Did your mother die? He looked at the deluding swarm mother. Oh, your mother doesn't want you anymore. In the path of the propagation, symbolized by leave the swarm and die, this statement seemed to be quite a blow to the mother. Under the ability to be 100% understood, this statement finally seemed to make the mother realize that it was likely also in a state of leaving the swarm. Its movements became somewhat stiff at this moment, and its counterattacks against the surroundings also began to gradually lose their strength. Increasingly dense artillery shells gradually engulfed it. More than half of the planet's concentrated firepower was soon poured onto this area enveloped by the amber-colored barrier. Smoke and dust filled the air, but the explosions were locked within the barrier and did not hit anyone outside. For a long time, the bombing ceased, and the smoke and dust dissipated, revealing the dying mother inside the barrier and other bug offspring that had long since been blown to death. Moraine raised his head, looking at the top of the mother's head, looking at that amber-colored phantom hammer. What a coincidence, isn't it? Moraine smiled and looked at the swarm in front of him. Back then, the swarm disaster of the universe ended under the Amber Lord's giant hammer. Destiny is truly wondrous. As Moraine's last word sounded, the phantom of the giant hammer in the sky also descended in sync. This did not bring any sound, but it caused the entire earth to shake violently. Within the ritual, the amber-colored light curtain shattered, carrying a violent wind as it dispersed in all directions. Blowing so hard that Moraine couldn't help but shield his eyes with his hand. Moraine patted the head of the sting bug in his arms, and walked away in the opposite direction while holding it. Behind him, one bug after another emerged, flying or crawling towards the corpses of the swarm that were crushed all over the ground, beginning their first meal since birth. There is a swarm king, and there is food. That's right. Moraine smiled, stroking the head of the sting bug in his arms, and said, I am the swarm king, and you are the food. Look, I didn't lie. Half an hour later, Moraine and Argenti stood in front of the door of the rare and precious spaceship, with the leader of the survivors of this planet standing in front of them. It was a scruffy old man. The old man excitedly grasped Argenti's hand, thanking him continuously. It wasn't that he was unwilling to thank Moraine, it was just that Moraine was holding a real sting bug in his hands, and a pile of bugs was crawling on his body, giving him a bit of PTSD. To be honest, the fact that he didn't call for Moraine to be beaten or killed because of his current appearance was already very, very restrained. Thank you very much, Lord Argenti and Lord Moraine. The survivors were all teary-eyed. Moraine glanced at Argenti, very curious about how he had solved the bug disaster on this planet in the original timeline. After all, if Moraine hadn't tricked the mother out, the bugs on this planet would only have increased the more they fought. He was simply a Superman. May Adrila be above from now on our planet will believe in beauty. The old man said, a bit incoherently. Oh, and Mr. Moraine, what path do you walk? I follow the path of elation. Oh, it's elation. The old man understood. Moraine didn't say that he was also a big bug. He felt that if he said it out loud, the group of people in front of him would definitely have a stress reaction. All right. All right. The old man nodded, then, I don't know how we should thank you. Argenti looked at Moraine. He never accepted rewards for helping others, but he would not make choices for Moraine. To avoid putting Moraine on the spot, after refusing the reward himself, which would make it difficult for Moraine to speak up, he decided to speak next. Although this looked a bit like he was intentionally setting up Moraine to show off his own magnanimity in not accepting rewards, for Argenti, being misunderstood was better than troubling others. He was confident that his performance of beauty would definitely be able to clarify any misunderstandings others had about him. After thinking for a moment, Moraine snapped his fingers and replied. Do you have any devices that can fold space? I want this. Chapter 62, The Carried Player +1 Inside the Synchronization Space. Honkai Star Rail Moraine walked in wearing a bathrobe, picking his ear with his little finger. His hair was a bit messy, with water droplets on the front. He looked like he had just woken up and finished washing up. Walking into the space and seeing the other Moraines not far away, he counted the number of people. Elden Ring Moraine wearing mage robes, Lord of Mysteries Moraine wearing a Victorian vest, One Punch Man Moraine wearing a training suit, and Jujutsu Kaisen Moraine still in his original skin. Everyone's here. He put his hand down and greeted the other versions of himself. Hey, what a coincidence. Currently, among all the Moraines, he was living the most comfortably. He had a high-tech living environment, all sorts of fresh things he had never encountered before, and cross-era games far beyond what he had ever known. Damn, you guys, seriously, he boasted, these interstellar-era games are just so fun. With my Eye of Mysteries synchronized so many times, I can't even see any flaws. Boos followed. The other Moraines already knew that Honkai Star Rail Moraine had escaped his predicament from their previous contact with Lord of Mysteries Moraine and Elden Ring Moraine, so they weren't surprised. After speaking, Honkai Star Rail Moraine shifted his gaze to Jujutsu Kaisen Moraine, who was currently the only one still wearing the clothes from when he transmigrated. Why haven't you changed your clothes? How long has it been over there? Honkai Star Rail Moraine asked. Jujutsu Kaisen Moraine held up a finger. Honkai Star Rail Moraine nodded, then there's no need to change clothes. No, it's been over an hour. One Punch Man Moraine helped Jujutsu Kaisen Moraine answer the question. Are you serious, bro? It's been months on my end and only an hour over there. Then you really have it made. Maybe you really can fight Sukuna on your first day. Grinding months or even a year's worth of proficiency in an hour, that's insane. Lord of Mysteries Moraine on the side also patted Jujutsu Kaisen Moraine on the shoulder. Congratulations, you've joined the glorious ranks of the carried players. He was finally not the most carried one anymore. Before this, he had held the title of the carried player. After all, 90% of his potion digestion was done by others. Jujutsu Kaisen Moraine was not ashamed but proud, spreading his arms. Of course, I became a carried player through my own ability, why shouldn't I be proud? I'm just missing a domain to be fully geared now. He pointed to himself proudly with his thumb. Of course, he meant fully geared in the jujitsu world. Honkai Star Rail Moraine rested his chin on his hand. Speaking of which, since it's been over an hour, Jogo and Fushiguro Toji should have met by now, right? Jujitsu Kaisen Moraine nodded. Honkai Star Rail Moraine clapped his hands. Great, I've always been curious about who is stronger, Fushiguro Toji or Jogo. But Jujitsu Kaisen Moraine thought for a moment and shrugged. If you put it that way, I don't know either. Actually, the other MES have asked this question too. The other Moraines nodded one after another. They were all the same person, so naturally, their curiosities were the same. How could you not know? Aren't you the one on the scene? Honkai Star Rail Moraine was incredulous. I can't say for sure. Jujitsu Kaisen Moraine extended his hand. You'll know once you take a look yourself. The palms high-fived, and the Moraines completed the synchronization of consciousness. The memories of Jujitsu Kaisen Moraine, and the others entered Honkai Star Rail Moraine's brain one after another. In less than a second, Honkai Star Rail Moraine successfully accepted the content. As he grew stronger, his ability to accept memories was no longer what it used to be. Days' worth of content entered his brain without needing even a second to process. According to the original timeline, after Zenin no Obito and the others finished off Dagon, the battered group would encounter Jogo, who arrived to support Dagon. But unfortunately, when Jogo, currently the strongest among the 4 calamity curses, arrived, Dagon only had one hand left. Thus, Jogo instantly killed several people present, resulting in 1 death and 2 injuries. However, in this timeline, Dagon was first countered by Moraine, beaten by Zenin no Obito wielding a special-grade curse tool, and finally finished off by Fushiguro Toji, who had just finished fighting Moraine and entered the domain a step later. So, when Jogo arrived, he had to face Zenin no Obito, who had received almost no damage, Kento Nanami, whose cursed energy consumption wasn't too high, Maki Zenin, who, while not very useful, was at least in her prime and wouldn't be a drag, and Fushiguro Toji, who, due to various special circumstances, possessed both cursed energy and a sorcerer-killer-level physique, and had even coincidentally triggered a black flash. There was also a certain suicide bomber, Fushiguro Megumi, who could blow himself up at any moment. This led to Jogo, who arrived later, getting beaten up quite miserably. When Jogo was furious and preparing to use his ultimate move, he sensed the cursed energy of the King of Curses, Sukuna, and left dejectedly. At least with the setup at the time, Jogo had no chance of winning without opening his domain or using his maximum technique. Ah, what a pity. Honkai Star Rail Moraine sighed. He was lamenting both the question he had always wanted to know the answer to, which he probably would never have a chance to know, and the fact that Jujitsu Kaisen Moraine couldn't watch the battle between Jogo and Sukuna up close, only able to watch from afar. After all, at that time, Jujitsu Kaisen Moraine had lost his physical enhancement, and because of a binding vow, his body couldn't use or produce any cursed energy for an hour, even converting other energy into cursed energy was impossible. The image quality of your on the scene report isn't even as clear as the anime. Lord of Mysteries Morian complained. At least the anime had close-ups, while Jujitsu Kaisen Moraine, in order not to get caught in the crossfire, almost ran out of Shibuya, and the whole time could only see some explosions. What can I do about it? Jujitsu Kaisen Moraine put a hand on his hip. You guys have synchronized so many times, I'm still using the default configuration. I didn't even know glintstone sorcery back then. Elden Ring Moraine asked curiously. If you knew it, would you have gone to watch it up close? He didn't remember his glintstone sorcery being that awesome. Jujitsu Kaisen Moraine snapped his fingers. If I knew glintstone sorcery, I could have made a telescope out of translucent glintstone. It would be clearer, just maybe with a blue filter. That's cowardly. At this moment, everyone completed the synchronization of memories. One Punch Man Morian finished the hero registration exam. Elden Ring Moraine was still on his way to the Weeping Peninsula. Taking a detour, Lord of Mysteries Morian discovered that all the gangs in Tingen had been bankrupted by him, and was annoyed at his overhunting, planning to wait for the gangs to breed for a while longer. And the other Moraines also accepted Honkai Star Rail Moraine's memories one after another. Chapter 63, Return to Jujitsu. Oh, a spatial suitcase, this is a good thing. Elden Ring Moraine was the first to state his opinion. Yesterday, after saving the planet he passed by, the thank you gift Moraine received was a black suitcase. It looked plain, with nothing special about it, and the storage space didn't look like it exceeded 0.2 cubic meters. But in fact, it had 100 cubic meters of space inside, which was worth 10,000 credits. I've said it before, the company is just a money pit. Honkai Star Rail Moraine said matter-of-factly. They didn't look like they felt any pain when they gave the suitcase away. It really is a good thing. Jujitsu Kaisen Morian also nodded, patted Honkai Star Rail Moraine on the shoulder. You can study this suitcase later, and see if you can figure out the technology for spatial folding. It might be helpful for my research on domains. Honkai Star Rail Moraine made an okay gesture. He was also quite curious about what his own domain would look like. Then you have to work hard yourself too. Honkai Star Rail Moraine reminded him. Don't rely on them for everything. Of course. Jujitsu Kaisen Morian replied. When he was watching from afar on the battlefield, he had encountered Principal Yaga Mazumichi and the school doctor, Shoko Yeri, from Jujitsu High, and had also tried to obtain information on barrier techniques. However, Jujitsu High didn't seem willing to give it. He decided that after he went back, he would have the luck-gathering broodmother ask Kusakabe for the new Shadow-style simple domain in the capacity of a savior. Although simple domain is also known as the domain of the weak, it has no sure-hit effect, no curse technique attached, and no domain shell. But at the end of the day, it is still a domain, which is very useful for his future research on his own domain. After the Moraines discussed it, they felt that they could also find an opportunity to learn Mifukuzuri in the future. This was another method used by ancient jujitsu sorcerers to counter domains, similar to simple domain, but it had a cage-shaped circular shell. Although maintaining Mifukuzuri requires forming hand seals with both hands, this wasn't much of a burden for Moraine. He could completely turn a part of his body into the swarm, and then let the insects form several pairs of hands, allowing him to open several cages at once. My potion has been digested for the most part, but I can't afford the materials. Lord of Mysteries Morian shared information. I plan to wait for the gangs in the East Borough to reproduce for a while longer. In the meantime, I'll just go to Backland to look around. The gangs in big cities must be richer, he said confidently. Once you get to Backland, you'll have to restrain yourself a bit. After all, there are several angels entrenched there. Backland, the capital of the Lone Kingdom, is a very magical place. In that city, low to mid-sequence individuals commit massacres, saints act with low profiles, and angels disguise themselves as ordinary people and infants. After all, in Backland, if angels like Amon really dared to cause a big scene, then the 7 gods would really be capable of descending. I don't think they will. Elden Ring Moraine stated, the 7 gods possess sufficient prophecy and divination abilities, so they must know that interfering with us excessively is not an option. Although the true gods certainly couldn't divine that the Moraines possessed a synchronized space. However, they should still be able to divine that excessive interference with Moraine is dangerous. After all, even we ourselves don't know if we will die directly, or if our souls will return here if we really die. Moreover, the limits of the Mask of Pleasure are unclear, but the fact that it can resist the corruption of the outer deity shows that it is at least at the angel level. If they really took action against us, as long as they couldn't kill us in an instant, left us with a breath of life, or let our souls return here, then we would definitely give them something big. Elden Ring Moraine explained. The synchronization of the Moraines is complete. If one of them goes to the extreme, then the rest will also go to the extreme. If such a thing really happened, Lord of Mysteries Morian would hide in the synchronized space where time does not flow for 10,000 years. By then, no one could predict what kind of thing the extreme transformed Moraines would synchronize. It might just be Swarm Disaster 2.0, Multiverse Online Edition. Perhaps this is exactly the reason why Elio took action to let Argenti save Moraine. Then what if the Lord of Storm's hands are faster than his brain, and he just attacks? One Punch Man Morian raised his hand to ask. What else can we say? Just give it to him. Lord of Mysteries Morian smiled and put one hand on his hip. Besides, this is the worst-case scenario. At least for now, the attitude of the 7 gods towards me can be considered friendly. Anyway, no one has ever refused me when I performed ritual magic to borrow their power.
After chatting for a while, the Moraines ended the conversation, said goodbye to each other, and left the synchronized space one after another. Moraine opened his eyes, stretched, and moved his body, which had become stronger once again due to the synchronization, making a few sounds of stones colliding. This was because the part of his body crystallized as a result of synchronizing with his Elden Ring self. However, unlike other mages whose bodies are difficult to recover once they start to crystallize, Moraine essentially possesses 5 bodies from an occult perspective. Therefore, he could put these crystals away, fuse them into his body, and then let them appear on any part of his body at will when he needed to use magic. After doing this, he looked back and saw a middle-aged man and a chestnut-haired girl in a white lab coat.
The man, Yaga Mazamichi, was looking at him at this moment, his eyes under his glasses filled with confusion. He discovered that Moraine seemed to have become a little different. Of course, his perception was naturally not as good as Argenti's. But there was no help for it. Moraine's changes were simply too great, and being this close, it was hard not to notice. Because of the time issue, the number of times he synchronized was far less than his other selves. This resulted in his gains after each synchronization being the most exaggerated. He would jump a huge chunk in one go. Compared to the Moraine of 1 second ago, the gap was perhaps even greater than the gap between a grade 1 Jujutsu sorcerer and a special grade sorcerer. Sitting on the ground next to the two of them was a man who looked deep in thought. He was wearing a black headscarf, had yellow hair, and was dressed in black. He was the grade 2 Jujutsu sorcerer Ino Takuma, whose curse technique was spirit descent, the effect of which was to let specific powerful spirits descend upon himself by putting on a head covering. Not long ago, he was almost beaten to death by Fushiguro Toji, who was also a vessel for descent. When Moraine was hiding here, he happened to run into the group from Jujutsu High, and naturally, he also saw Ino Takuma, who was receiving treatment there. The two chatted for a while and hit it off. After seeing him go back and forth with Fushiguro Toji, Ino had expressed his envy. Do you know why you couldn't beat Fushiguro Toji? At that time, Moraine said this, because you put on the wrong head covering. You can try this kind of head covering next time. Moraine used wish power to briefly create an illusion. It was a white head covering with the character Sin written on the front. Try this next time. Chapter 64, Glintstone Rabbit, 2-in-1. Putting the matter of the white hood aside for the moment, Moraine leaned against the wall, slowly sat down, and began to converse with Ino Takuma, who was sitting on the ground. Do you know about Mifyakaj? Moraine asked Ino Takuma. Yeah, I do, Ino Takuma nodded. I heard it's a technique invented by ancient jujitsu sorcerers to counter domains. Heard of it? Oh, so that means you can't use it. Moraine concluded. Yeah, I can't, Ino Takuma replied matter-of-factly. That was perfectly normal, after all. What modern jujitsu sorcerer would have the spare time to learn this? Falling Blossom Emotion, Simple Domain, no matter which one it was, they were all better than Mifyakaj. This was true in terms of both practical value and ease of learning. Although he couldn't use any of them. Is Moraine-senpai looking to learn the ability to counter domains? Ino Takuma asked. No, I want to learn a domain, Moraine answered. So that's it. Ino Takuma struck his palm with his fist. As expected of a big shot who could go toe-to-toe with Fushiguro Toji, he actually wanted to reverse engineer a real domain using a simple domain. But in that case, shouldn't Moraine-senpai be learning barrier technique? However, he still kindly reminded him. Although simple domain is a type of barrier technique, learning barrier technique directly would definitely be much more cost-effective. It was clear that Ino Takuma was a very talkative person. Even though he had almost been beaten to death by Fushiguro Toji a short while ago, he still looked cheerful now. I'll learn both, I'll learn both. Moraine nodded with a smile. He was a mystery prior, after all. There was no problem with learning as much as he wanted. The corridor fell into a brief silence. Moraine tilted his head and looked out the window. Through the window, he could see collapsed houses in the distance and large, widespread scorch marks. These were the marks left behind by the battle between Jogo and Sukuna a short while ago. They had almost blown up a third of Shibuya. At that time, Sukuna, who had just briefly regained control of his body and come back to life, had made a binding vow with Jogo. If Jogo could touch him once before dying, then he would follow Jogo's orders. But unfortunately, despite causing so much destruction, Jogo still hadn't been able to touch Sukuna even once. However, dying at Sukuna's hands in the end might not necessarily have been a bad thing for him. Looking at the ruins not far away, a thought suddenly occurred to Moraine. According to the timeline, at this moment in the original story, the suicide bomber Fushiguro Megumi would have already been pushed by Shigemo Haruta to self-destruct and summon Maharaga. This would have attracted Ryaman Sukuna, who hadn't had his fill of fighting yet. The two of them fighting would have destroyed another small half of Shibuya. But now, Shigemo Haruta had been killed by him. In that sense, he could be considered to have saved thousands of people. Moraine looked at Lianyun behind him, and reached out to stroke her. You're a great contributor too. Lianyun also rubbed against his hand. Ino Takuma watched from the side and couldn't help but exclaim. Senpai has such a good relationship with his Shikigami. Is this the secret to Senpai's strength? Maybe I should contract a Shikigami too. Shikigami. Moraine scratched Lianyun's chin. Ah, indeed, it's really easy to misunderstand. Misunderstand? Ino Takuma felt confused. Moraine patted Lianyun's head, and began to explain his relationship with Lianyun. As he listened, Ino Takuma's eyes widened more and more, and even Yeri Shoko and Yaga Mazamichi not far away looked stunned. The cigarette in Yeri Shoko's mouth had long since fallen to the ground, but she didn't care, and Yaga Mazamichi's eyes were also wide open behind his glasses. At first, when this principal heard Moraine call the luck-gathering broodmother his child, he thought he had met a kindred spirit. After all, he was also the type who could create children. He always created some furry dolls and briefly made them come alive. That is, cursed corpses. Among them, he even truly created a living cursed corpse. That was Panda. Yaga Mazamichi had always treated Panda as his own child. Now, seeing Moraine call a butterfly daughter, he really thought he had finally found a soulmate. But when Moraine said that this was his biological daughter, and that his blood flowed through her, Yaga Mazamichi urgently rescinded the kindred spirit label. He was now more worried about whether the person in front of him, who seemed to be a true furry enthusiast, would make a move on his precious son, Panda. I didn't expect you to have such a hobby. A slightly deep male voice appeared, mixed with laughter. Fushiguro Toji, with a scar at the corner of his mouth, appeared at the corner of the stairs. He was carrying Fushiguro Megumi in his hand, and behind him followed Kyuzukabe, Panda, and a sturdy man with black hair. Just then, Ino Takuma jumped up abruptly, pointing at the stairwell with a tense expression. That. His expression was a bit tense at first, but then it quickly relaxed as he looked at Moraine not far away. The experience of almost being beaten to death a short while ago had ultimately left him with some psychological trauma. Yeah, isn't it great? Moraine smiled and looked at Fushiguro Toji, then at Fushiguro Megumi behind him. And Panda, who had been quietly pulled into a corner by Yaga Mazamichi for a private conversation. You saved your son. He withdrew his gaze. Yeah, that fireball suddenly fell from the sky just now. It scared the hell out of me. Fushiguro Toji said in an indifferent tone. He was talking about Jogo's maximum technique. A huge fireball descending from the sky had almost flattened a quarter of Shibuya. Fushiguro Megumi still had that poker face, but he was holding a rabbit in his arms. "Oh, you saved my rabbit. That's great." Moraine opened his arms excitedly. Fushiguro Megumi placed the rabbit, which he couldn't retract into his shadow, on the ground. He watched the rabbit quickly leave him and run toward Moraine, his expression somewhat complex. This rabbit was one of the many clones of the Shikigami, Rabbit Escape, so he wouldn't feel bad even if it were turned against him. But what he was most worried about now was whether Moraine's ability might affect the main body of the Shikigami. "Ah, hungry, aren't you?" Moraine picked up the rabbit, rubbed it in his arms, looked at its belly, and thought thoughtfully, "Right, Shikigami need to replenish their energy. Shikigami need to be maintained by cursed energy. If one doesn't ingest cursed energy, it will definitely become weaker and weaker now." Yaga Mazamichi looked back and confirmed the thought in his mind. He pulled Panda and continued his heart-to-heart talk. Suddenly, Moraine had an idea. Light blue glintstone appeared on the back of his hand. He reached out with his other hand and removed the part of his flesh that had turned into glintstone. This was a part of his body. This was glintstone, an essential item for glintstone sorcerers in the Elden Ring world to channel magic. It itself possessed the effect of generating energy. Although it produced glintstone magic, any energy that could sustain the rabbit's survival was good energy. Moraine pinched the back of the rabbit's neck, held it upright, and turned its belly toward himself. The rabbit blinked its red eyes. "I suddenly thought of a method that might allow you to live longer without needing regular feedings." The rabbit blinked its red eyes again. Moraine smiled, and after finishing, he pushed his hand forward. The glintstone turned into a stream of blue cursed energy and merged into its body. Glintstone is corrosive, which is also the reason why using glintstone sorcery causes crystallization. This inherently corrosive cursed energy began to fuse with the rabbit's own cursed energy. Then, Moraine converted that energy into glintstone magic to make it further fuse with the rabbit. Soon, some slight crystallization began to appear on the rabbit's body. Tiny blue crystals appeared on its back, and a piece of glintstone appeared embedded in its chest, right over its heart. Moraine held the rabbit up high. "This is perfect," he said happily. These glintstones ultimately originated from his body, they were a part of him. Since that was the case, they could divide, they could replicate, and they could reproduce. This was the propagation. In this way, the rabbit could continuously obtain magic from the glintstone to replenish itself. This would probably slowly, bit by bit, replace all of its original cursed energy, making it a glintstone creature, just like the glintstone dragons of the Elden Ring world, becoming a pure magical life form. But neither Moraine nor the rabbit minded. "From now on, you shall be called Glintstone Rabbit," Moraine said happily. He hoped that if it learned to speak, it wouldn't call him doctor. The Glintstone Rabbit replied with an equally excited shriek. Fushiguro Toji's voice sounded from the side. "Did you just create a kind of crystal that can continuously generate cursed energy?" Fushiguro Toji looked at this scene, his eyes filled with some shock. Not just him, everyone looked at Moraine. No need to absorb negative emotions, no need for other replenishment. A crystal that could continuously release energy just by existing. Yeri Shoko and Panda immediately looked at Yaga Mazamichi. Because he had also created something similar. And if it weren't for the fact that he was Gojo Satoru's teacher, he would have been sentenced to death long ago. "Ah, theoretically, yes." Moraine nodded. "What, you want one too?" He looked Fushiguro Toji up and down. "Right, you're dying. If you can't get an energy supply, you will eventually die again sooner or later." Moraine grinned. "Looks like you don't need to repay me for saving your life in your next life, right?" Hearing Moraine's words, Fushiguro Toji's originally tense mood suddenly calmed down. He also smiled. "Ah, yeah. Looks like I really can repay you before I die." A few minutes later, Fushiguro Toji pulled open his clothes and looked at his chest. On the surface of the skin corresponding to his heart, a layer of light blue glintstone had already covered it. He could feel that this glintstone was slowly emitting a kind of energy he had never felt before. At this moment, he suddenly realized that this didn't seem to be cursed energy. Fushiguro Toji glanced at Moraine, but said nothing and buttoned his shirt very naturally. This energy was bit by bit remodeling his body, altering his flesh and soul. However, he didn't care. Anyway, the current soul wasn't his own to begin with. It was just that he could feel it. When the area covered by his soul exceeded 1/2, his life would be completely in the other person's hands. But so what? He was already a dead man to begin with. Subsequently, Moraine looked at the sturdy black-haired man following behind Fushiguro Toji. He was a man who looked to be in his 20s. He was wearing a black jujitsu high uniform, a jacket and long pants, had black hair styled in a samurai topknot, and his body was covered in knotted muscles. And had huge trapezius muscles. Up until just now, he had been silent, just watching silently. This was grade 1 jujitsu sorcerer Tadou Aoi, who also mastered Simple Domain, and was a disciple of special grade sorcerer Yuki Tsukumo. The Simple Domain, of the new shadow style, had a binding vow of internal transmission only, no external teaching, but there was one exception. Menkyo Kaiden. This was the highest realm of various schools in Japan, representing that the user had mastered the entire inheritance of the school, emphasizing a deeper understanding of the school's philosophy and secrets, and was personally awarded by the school's grandmaster. It was usually extremely difficult to obtain. And a person who obtained Menkyo Kaiden meant that the school recognized that this person had mastered all the core mysteries, and allowed him to teach independently and open a dojo. And currently in this era, there were very few people who had obtained the new shadow-style Menkyo Kaiden. Among them, two were two of the only 3 remaining special-grade sorcerers. Gojo Satoru and Yuki Tsukumo. Among them, Yuki Tsukumo was Tadou Aoi's teacher. Originally, joining the new shadow style directly should have been the simplest way to obtain Simple Domain, but it also had drawbacks. For example, one needed to sign various unequal contracts, such as having to obey the dispatch of the new shadow style head, or the new shadow style head being able to arbitrarily extract the lifespan of new shadow style members, and so on. He had originally planned to try to find the new shadow style head afterwards, first use insects to eat him from the inside out, then heal him with reverse cursed technique, repeating this back and forth a dozen times, and through this method, force the other party to violate the binding vow and teach him Simple Domain. But since there was a better target, he didn't need to do such laborious things. You are grade 1 jujitsu sorcerer Tadou Aoi, right? Moraine stepped forward to shake his hand, stating his intention. Tadou Aoi also shook his hand in return. After a brief conversation, Tadou Aoi quickly understood what Moraine said. The one who obtained Menkyo Kaiden is my mentor, Yuki Tsukumo, not me. Tadou Aoi let go of his hand and waved it. If you really want to learn, go find her, don't look for me. We haven't been in contact for a long time. Ah, is that so? That's really a pity. Moraine shook his head helplessly. What a pity, it seemed the old head of the new shadow style still wouldn't be able to escape his fate. But on second thought, actually, when he used to watch anime, he found that group of rotten old geezers disgusting. He just simply wanted to torture the higher UPS of the jujitsu world. So regardless of whether Tadou Aoi would really teach him Simple Domain here, he would do it anyway later. Thinking of this, he felt relieved. Thinking for a moment, Moraine raised a question again. If you can't teach it, that's fine, but can you demonstrate it? Moraine asked. Demonstrating it shouldn't violate the binding vow. Tadou Aoi raised an eyebrow. Do you think you can learn it just by looking at it? Aha, Moraine laughed. I just simply want to see it. Tadou Aoi looked at Moraine, paused for a few seconds and suddenly grinned. No problem, but I hate boring men. I can demonstrate Simple Domain for you, but before that you need to answer me a question. Here it comes. It's the biggest classic scene in the jujitsu world. Under Moraine's gaze, Tadou Aoi spoke slowly. What kind of women do you like? His gaze swept over Lianyun behind Moraine. Oh, I asked wrong. What kind of females do you like? Or males are fine too. Good question. Moraine nodded. To learn simple domain from To-Do Aoi, at this time, one should go along with To-Do Aoi's thinking, give an answer that aligns with his preferences, and try to become his best friend. But that was the thinking of a loser. I like anyone as long as they are good-looking, because I am purely lecherous. Moraine said proudly. Your answer. To-Do Aoi began to think. Forget it, it's passable. To-Do Aoi shook his head. He could feel that Moraine's answer came from his heart, so he accepted Moraine's answer. Moraine indeed liked anyone as long as they were good-looking enough. Since that was the case, it naturally included To-Do Aoi's taste. He and Moraine were not best friends, but they were not enemies either. At most, they were passers-by. They were not on the same path. A bit of a shortcut, but it barely passed. It's not particularly boring, so I will show it to you. But as punishment for your shortcut, I'm going to beat you up. I'll use the simple domain you've been longing for to beat you up. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland. Chapter 65, Curse Technique Reversal of Telepathy. Sure, Moraine nodded with a smile, as long as you have it, that's fine. Anything works, I'm not picky. As the words fell, Aoi To-Do suddenly turned his waist and body, assuming a posture similar to a quick-draw slash. But his hands were empty, he was not holding a sword. A circle of light spread out from under his feet. New shadow style a quick draw, he clapped his hands together lightly, then shaped his right hand into a hand blade, slashing diagonally upward into the empty air in front of him. The moment his hands clapped together, Moraine, who had previously been at a distance, suddenly entered the range of the simple domain, and appeared right in front of Aoi To-Do. At the moment Aoi To-Do clapped, Moraine swapped positions with a small pebble in front of him. His upward hand blade was covered in blue cursed energy, slashing toward Moraine's chest as if it were a real katana. He was more accustomed to using his fists, but as a student of the special-grade jujitsu sorcerer Yukitsukumo, he was certainly capable of using new shadow-style sword techniques if required. This sneak attack was quite effective, anyone else might have truly fallen for it. But unfortunately for him, Moraine possessed intelligence on Aoi To-Do, and knew that his curse technique, Boogie Woogie, could swap the positions of two objects imbued with cursed energy by clapping. And by deploying the simple domain, Aoi To-Do had effectively imbued the entire 2-meter radius around himself with cursed energy. Moraine's hand gripped Aoi To-Do's wrist, stopping the hand blade strike. At the same time, a light ignited in his eyes. Aoi To-Do flipped his wrist, quickly shaking off Moraine's hand, and threw a punch with his other hand toward Moraine's face. However, Moraine, as if possessing the foresight of a soothsayer, raised a hand in advance and caught Aoi To-Do's fist perfectly. Aoi To-Do felt his hand slam into a body of water. The next moment, his hand was pulled, causing him to stumble forward 2 steps. While he was off balance, Moraine used the momentum from Aoi To-Do's initial punch to half-turn his body, swinging his arm. His palm whipped onto Aoi To-Do's shoulder with a crisp sound. Water stream rock smashing fist. It hurts. Aoi To-Do subconsciously gritted his teeth. Looking at Moraine, he hadn't seemed to use much strength, so Aoi To-Do hadn't concentrated too much cursed energy into his shoulder. But when the palm struck, he realized something was wrong. It was heavy and painful. Aoi To-Do was struck, feeling his shoulder go numb, and losing strength in it. He immediately lowered his center of gravity, turned to the side, and thrust his other hand forward, aiming his elbow at Moraine's chest. Moraine did not dodge or evade, allowing the attack to land. Using that force, he leaned his body backward and swung his left leg upward, kicking toward Aoi To-Do's chin. Another crisp clapping sound rang out. Moraine and Aoi To-Do swapped positions, ending up back-to-back. Moraine's kick missed, his raised leg high in the air in a vertical split, his body parallel to the ground. As Aoi To-Do swapped positions with Moraine, he threw a punch backward, but Moraine's reaction was so fast, as if he had known Aoi to do was going to swap, that he extended his palm at the same time. Palm and fist collided. The two fought faster and faster. Aoi to do held one hand in a fist and the other as a palm, occasionally throwing a punch or using a hand blade to execute new shadow-style sword techniques. Beneath his feet, the simple domain was maintained. This was not useless. Because of this, all the small pebbles underfoot were imbued with Aoi to do's cursed energy, allowing him to make himself and Moraine swap positions with any object within the simple domain, such as gravel or dust. To Moraine, it felt like the world was spinning. Aoi to do's attacks came from all directions, and the scenery before his eyes shifted constantly. But Moraine was not the only one fighting with frustration. Aoi to do was also having a difficult time. He felt as if he had walked into a river. Under the resistance of the water, he could barely move. Every punch and palm strike had to break through layers of resistance, and he was frequently pulled by the current in various directions. But that wasn't the most annoying part. What was most annoying was that Moraine seemed to always know in advance what he wanted to do. Whether it was feints or pretending to change the flow of cursed energy, it was all easily seen through. Several times, Aoi to do felt that Moraine had already reacted before he even made his move. Curse technique reversal, telepathy. After Lord of Mysteries Morian awakened his reverse curse technique, this was the first time Moraine had used telepathy in battle. Curse technique reversal, a telepathy had the ability to steal others' inner thoughts, but it required physical contact to take effect. However, constant contact was not required. After each touch, the effect lasted for 5 seconds, but to extend it, physical contact had to be maintained. Yet, as long as contact was made at least once every 5 seconds, all of Aoi to do's thoughts and intentions were crystal clear in Moraine's mind. And Moraine, having concentrated various Beyonder powers and synchronized several times, was fully capable of analyzing Aoi to do's thoughts while dealing with his movements. While the battle raged on the other side, Masamichi Yaga was still whispering with Panda. "Why are you with him?" Masamichi Yaga asked Panda in a low voice. He was asking about Fushiguro Toji. As the jujitsu sorcerer killer, who had once nearly killed his own student, Masamichi Yaga had a very deep impression of this person. He didn't care why Fushiguro Toji had been resurrected, he was only worried that his precious Panda's life was being threatened by the other party. Panda immediately knew who the principal was talking about and answered in a lowered voice, "We ran into him halfway. At the time, Kusakabe and I had just run out from under that giant fireball when we met him and Megumi Fushiguro. I saw him grabbing Megumi Fushiguro by the back of his neck with one hand, and Megumi Fushiguro was struggling, so I thought he had kidnapped Megumi Fushiguro." "You didn't attack him, did you?" Masamichi Yaga frowned, realizing the situation was not simple. Panda nodded and pointed to his left eye. "Look, I was punched here, it even left a black eye." Panda tried to tattle to his parent. But unfortunately, his parent couldn't beat Fushiguro Toji either, so he could only express his helplessness. "You're a panda, you're supposed to have panda eyes, okay?" Fushiguro Toji's voice suddenly joined their conversation. "And even if you two lower your voices, I can still hear you." He appeared beside the human and the panda like a ghost, without the grade 2 and grade 1 sorcerers noticing at all. Masamichi Yaga and Panda were both startled. "If you have something to say it openly," Fushiguro Toji said, crossing his arms. "By the way, do you know where there's a horse racing track nearby? You want to go horse racing?" Masamichi Yaga immediately spotted an opportunity to get rid of Fushiguro Toji, and quickly pulled out his phone, searching for the location of a horse racing track on the map. Fushiguro Toji leaned over to take a look, his eyebrows raised. "Ah, thanks." He chuckled, then suddenly reached out and hoisted Megumi Fushiguro, who was watching the battle, onto his shoulder. "What are you doing?" Megumi Fushiguro immediately began to struggle. "Shut up, kid." Fushiguro Toji carried Megumi Fushiguro, letting him struggle and hit his back, and pushed off with his feet. He instantly shattered the window, jumped to the roof of a building across the street, and left the area, leaping toward the outside of Shibuya, at a speed that was almost like teleportation. Chapter 66. Aoi Todo's Mental Theater. He left. Panda said. Masamichi Yaga nodded. Should we not stop him? Panda turned his head to ask. Masamichi Yaga was silent for half a second, then shook his head. He should be fine. Though, even if something were to happen, there wouldn't be anything he could do anyway. Besides, Megumi Fushiguro is Toji Fushiguro's son. Masamichi Yaga looked at Panda, suddenly feeling a sense of empathy for Toji Fushiguro, understanding his intentions. A tsundere dad who doesn't want to see his son stay on a dangerous battlefield, but isn't good at expressing himself, so he carries his son off to the horse racing track. That's probably it. He looked at the battlefield between Moraine and Aoi Todo once more. He wouldn't ask why Panda was with Aoi Todo. After all, everyone had come to Shibuya to exorcise cursed spirits, so running into each other was normal. The fight on the battlefield continued, having reached a white-hot intensity. Moraine was using the water stream rock-smashing fist he had learned from Bang, and without setting any binding vows or using any offensive curse techniques, he was fighting Aoi Todo to a standstill using only his cursed energy reinforcement. However, the very next second, the scene before Moraine's eyes suddenly changed. The dimly lit corridor was replaced by a bright classroom. An empty classroom, a spacious podium, glowing incandescent lights, cherry blossoms drifting in from outside the window, and a person standing by the window watching the cherry blossoms. The wind blew in from outside, stirring the skirt of the person by the window. It was someone wearing a white-stockinged JK school uniform. The burly man, Aoi Todo. The JK uniform, 2 sizes too small, looked like a tight-fitting suit on the 2-meter-tall, muscular Aoi Todo. He looked out the window melancholically, somewhat lost in thought. What are you thinking about? Best sister. The classroom door was pushed open, and another 1.8-meter-tall white-stockinged JK walked in from outside. Although this young girl looked extremely tall, she was at least undeniably female, and a girl with quite a good appearance at that. The JK outfit didn't look strange on her. She was the idol star Aoi Todo liked, Takata-chan. Moraine stood at the back of the classroom, blinking. This is painful to look at. That's right, it was said that reading Aoi Todo's mind was no less punishing than taking a hit from a mini-unlimited void. Aoi Todo claimed to possess a brain with an IQ of 530,000, but liked to use 529,000 of that processing power to construct his own mental theater. He had once calculated a 3-minute-long mental scenario in 0.01 seconds, completing the detailing, rendering, and script performance, analyzing the intelligence of the special-grade cursed spirit Hanami with his idol Takata-chan within his mental theater, and cracking the opponent's ability within that 0.01 seconds. This was similar to the current situation. While he was constructing this mental theater in his mind, Moraine, who was currently reading his mind, was dragged into this scene as well. It's you, Takata-chan, you've come to find me again. Aoi Todo, wearing the JK uniform, looked at his idol. However, in the current script they were sisters. Takata walked over to Aoi Todo's side on her own, accompanying him, as they looked at the cherry blossoms outside the window. Why would you do something like that? Attacking someone so suddenly is really rough. Takata said, it's really not ladylike at all, my best sister. Aoi Todo raised his head, looking up at the sky at a 45-degree angle. That person, he is at least a grade 1 jujitsu sorcerer. Counting his butterflies, I even suspect he could be rated as special grade. But before this, I had never heard of him. I am deeply suspicious of this. Aoi Todo raised his fist. I must determine whether he is friend or foe. Is that so? Takata looked at Aoi Todo and nodded, you really are gentle. Indeed, when faced with a sudden attack, a person can always subconsciously reveal many things. You are absolutely right. After a pause, she continued to ask, so, have you seen him clearly now? Aoi-to-do rested his chin on one hand and thought for a moment. I've seen some things. He's a decent person. He held back even when faced with my sudden attack, didn't get angry because of my ambush, and I didn't feel like he was acting. But that's not enough. I hope to make him reveal more. Takada put her hands behind her back and looked at Aoi-to-do. But you are currently being suppressed. Yes, I am being suppressed. Aoi-to-do admitted his disadvantage. Facing his best sister, there was nothing he couldn't say. He proudly lifted his chin. Therefore I am mobilizing my superbrain every moment, thinking of countermeasures, and every time, I can make the best judgment. Every action of mine is definitely the best in the current situation, the optimal solution. Takada leaned against the window, looking at Aoi-to-do's serious profile, and suddenly reached out and snapped her fingers in front of him. That is indeed true. Faced with an ordinary opponent, what you are doing is indeed correct. She first affirmed Aoi-to-do's approach but then quickly countered. But from the very beginning, when he first talked to us, he was directly putting words into our minds. Aoi-to-do nodded. Yes, this suggests he likely possesses an ability similar to telepathy. His words suddenly stopped. Telepathy. He muttered to himself. Takada retracted her extended hand and wiggled her finger. Then, what if he possesses the reverse curse technique, and thus can perform a curse technique reversal? What kind of ability would he gain? As you said, he likely possesses special grade strength. In that case, mastering the reverse curse technique wouldn't be impossible, would it? Aoi-to-do's eyes widened. I see, I understand. That's right, it's mind reading. Aoi-to-do suddenly looked to the very back of the classroom. You saw it, didn't you? The wall behind Moraine suddenly exploded. Aoi-to-do, wearing the men's uniform, appeared behind Moraine and punched at Moraine's abdomen. The next moment, the scene before them restored, and their consciousnesses returned to reality. It took less than 0.01 seconds. Moraine grabbed the fist aimed at his abdomen, braced his shoulder, turned, and executed a shoulder throw. Aoi-to-do's feet left the ground as he was lifted up. The feeling was wrong. The feeling was wrong. Moraine felt like he was grabbing air. The Aoi-to-do from just a moment ago was imagined by the real Aoi-to-do. For Aoi-to-do, whose brain could operate at an overclock speed, this wasn't a difficult thing. He utilized Moraine's ability to create a clone for himself. Moraine realized he had entered the classroom from before again. However, all the desks and chairs had been moved to the corner, leaving an open space in the center of the classroom. The real Aoi-to-do had by this time shifted to Moraine's side, throwing a punch that struck Moraine's chest. This was the first time since the fight started today that he had landed a solid hit on Moraine. Without it being deflected or leveraged, Moraine only had time to hastily shield his body with cursed energy before being knocked back several steps. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.